Lady Epitaph Ghost Stories. Tonight, Growing Up with Ghosts. My life has long been filled with various ghostly encounters, both peaceful and frightening. The first is one that I don't personally remember, but has been told as family lore by my parents. As an infant and young child, I was very close to my Grandpa Max. There are many pictures of me being spoiled by Grandpa Max, and you can see not only a baby enraptured by the old man, but also of a grandpa completely wrapped around this baby girl's little finger. My mother's story begins one late evening when I was 4 years old and we were living a few states away from Grandpa Max. She woke up because she heard me talking in my room down the hall. She quietly walked down the hall and into my room through the open door. I was sitting up in my bed talking to someone she couldn't see, telling them I promised to be a good girl, I would give my mama a hug because she would be sad they were gone, and that I would miss them very much. Then I laid back down into my bed, the covers were raised over my shoulders, and I was again fast asleep, having never taken notice of my mother's presence. Just as soon as I was tucked back in by the presence in the room, the house phone rang, startling my mother. She went to the phone, picked up the receiver, and heard my grandmother's voice on the other end. My grandma told my mom that Grandpa Max had just passed away. The next morning, with tear-filled eyes, my mother told me that my Grandpa Max had passed away and gone to heaven. I told her I knew he came to see me, and that's when she knew who I had been talking to the night before. Later, when I was 8 years old, my family moved to another country as part of my father's job. Along the way, we stopped by the town where all our relatives live: grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. Our move coincided with the family reunion on my father's side of the family. It was an opportunity to see my great-grandma at the old family home. She was a wonderful woman with a fierce spirit but gentle patience. There wasn't a question I could ask her that would go unanswered, and she always smelled of rosewater. On that visit, she gave me a beautiful cobalt blue glass vase that I loved. She gave my parents the rocking chair she used when my father was a baby. When we got to our new house and began unpacking, my mother placed the rocking chair on the landing of the stairs to wait while she decided where in the house it would go. Suddenly, the chair started slowly rocking. Not in the way as when you bump something and not caused by any wind, just slowly rocking as if someone was in it. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped and the phone rang. One of my great-aunts was calling to tell my father that my great-grandmother had passed. I'd like to believe that she stopped by for a visit that day. As I got older, whenever I was going through a particularly rough patch in life, I would either find the blue vase moved to someplace noticeable or catch the scent of rosewater in the air. I smelt it most recently this past week just before my birthday. When Lord Epitaph and I lived in our first home together, we had many ghostly experiences. A lot of time we would hear the laughter and running feet of children, perhaps a precursor of the many children we would later have in our home. The most unsettling involved any maintenance the home required. Routinely, we'd hear someone on the roof fixing the cooling system. We had a hot water heater that was constantly going out, which of course we'd only discover after a cold jolt from the shower. One evening, just as it became dark, I was home alone and decided to take a relaxing shower. I turned the water on, undressed, and stepped into the icy stream. I promptly jumped out and wrapped a towel around myself. I heard my front door open and close. Thinking that Lord Epitaph had returned home, he was due to be home, I yelled that the water heater was out again. The front door opened and closed again, and I could hear the sounds of Lord Epitaph tinkering with the water heater. I put on a robe, walked through the hall and out the front door to say hello. When I looked in the direction of the water heater door, it was opened, but there were no legs at the bottom of the door. I held my breath as the roar of flame for the water heater gained life, and the door slowly closed and latched without anyone of physical body being there. I just stood on the front porch staring when Lord Epitaph arrived from the opposite side of the yard, only having just returned home. After I explained what I'd seen, he inspected the water heater to find it was lit and working. A talk with the landlady later revealed that her husband had been the only one to do any maintenance on the property, but that he had died exactly a year before. Nowadays, especially living in the realm, I developed a respect for ghosts, and rarely does the presence of one cause me any alarm. There is, however, one that causes fear in my heart. It appears without notice, a dark shadow caught out of the corner of my eye. Items that are precious to me disappear for days or weeks, and then reappear in a different location where they would never normally be found. Even mundane items that I just happen to need at that particular moment suddenly can't be found until days later. We've seen our toaster go flying across the kitchen when only seconds before it was shut behind a cabinet door. Children's toys will blink and sound in the middle of the night when the children are sleeping, even with batteries missing. Sometimes it stands as a dark shadow looming over my side of the bed. When it is there, I can't breathe. I can't even call out to Lord Epitaph for help. My body is heavy, and it takes all my strength to turn my back to it and pray a couple of earthly Hail Mary prayers before the heaviness is gone and I can turn to find it is no longer there. I have tried to cleanse our home, performed blessing spells, but still it returns. Just a few days ago, it spoke in a whisper to the two eldest children, but they couldn't understand what it said. I was sitting, writing this set of stories to tell, when I felt a hand placed upon my shoulders and fingers tapping a cadence. Of course, no one was there. My back was to the wall and no one else was in the room. I only hope it just continues to play, but I still feel worrisome about its presence. Right now, we'll just have to wait and see. Yesterday, when I was telling my mother about tonight's transmission and that I wasn't sure if I would tell my own personal ghost stories or if I would try to tell someone else's, she related to me a story of her own. Lady Elizabeth was born and grew up in a small town. In her town, there lived an older lady who would walk from her home to the train station on the one day a week the train ran to wait for her lost fiancé who never came home from the war. She wore her simple wedding dress with a long green coat and a hat. Every week was the same. She dressed, walked, waited, and went home. Lady Elizabeth told me that even when the lady died, she kept up her vigil. The townsfolk would see her make her weekly journey wearing her green coat and hat and waiting at the train station. After many years, to make way for modern progression, the train station was demolished, and yet the lady in green, her green coat and hat, she still conducts her pilgrimage to wait for her love that never returned.
Threnody Radio.
Lord Epitaph. Ghost Stories. A world without ghost stories. Ghost stories are almost non-existent here in the realm. How is this, you ask? I can explain that relatively easy. I was born and live in a realm that has every facet that makes up a ghost story. We have vampire, werewolves, mages, witches, monsters. My very manor itself runs on ghost power. So I ask you, how do you have a ghost story in a realm that is the very definition of a ghost story? You do not. You have to step outside of your own realm to help create the ghost story. There, you can bring back the tales that people find terrifying and horrific. I will tell you the only ghost story I know. It is a story that I created, a story that is the only one in a realm that every day holds fantastic conjurings. could make men who face what you call demons on a daily basis have a shiver of fear run down their spines. A tale that keeps children of the realm up at night watching the shadows for something even more terrifying than the boogeyman itself. This tale has to do with the most horrific things I have ever seen. A trip back to the Reaper's Gate would be a field trip compared to this. I will stop boring you with the lead-ups to this horrific tale. The ghost story that I have prepared for you has to do with my first trip through the portal to a realm that is known as Earth. It was not exactly my first trip, but it was the trip to Earth where I spent time observing. I can tell you this story using all the correct names for items, as I have since made multiple trips to Earth, and now know the workings of that realm. The moment I stepped through the portal, I was surrounded by a massive amount of people. I was taken over by all the noise. The people were talking on phones and listening to music through devices stuck in their ears. The carriages screaming loudest of all, echoing off the huge structures looming over all. Blaring from every corner, it was relentless. Looking up, no stars could be seen, swallowed by the intense glow from countless electric lights. To look upon them is like staring into one of the lady's vials of liquid light. I felt my nerve failing in the wake of this bombardment of my senses. It was all pressing down upon me, trying to drag my mind from me. Confusing and unbearable to me. How could these people be content in this den of pure noise? How could they not understand the beauty of silence in the world? To just listen to her soft, sweet voice is indeed a treasure, letting it gather you and comfort you like a tender love. Gathering myself, I used an old trick. I focused my thoughts, throwing the audible sensation and light bombardment into the focus of everything, not letting it be the main point. Never have I been any place where the populace was so grossly overgrown. Not even the Grand Western Empire on a festival day could produce as many people in a single place at once. All of these people wayfaring about with what seemed to be no guidance. None aware of the other unless engaged in conversation with the closest person to them. It was not even a challenge to be unseen. There are times I use a trick to be unseen. Here, there was no need. Not even the inhabitants who blatantly shoved me were aware that I existed. In the realm, these people would disappear into the night, stolen away by creatures who look for slim opportunities like this. A mind not paying attention to the surroundings. I stood in a doorway to take in the scene. My training to observe going insane, noting everything these people were unaware of. The woman struggling with her unruly child. The man watching with hungry eyes as a food service cart prepared foodstuffs. The looks of pain and despair on almost every face. Some reflected happiness. On one, I even saw the familiar look of the next soul for the Reaper. Watching, I was suddenly aware of someone approaching from my back. Not being a fool, I carried only my ceremonial dagger with me. It being part of the Lamina Sepulchra, I knew it would be all I needed. The presence grew closer as I readied myself. I heard a voice with an accent that I can only mimic rather than explain. "Hey, asshole! You can't just stand here!" "Why not?" I asked, turning to face a man twice my size, wearing a white barmaid's apron and what looked like a paper hat on his head. "Because you have to buy something to stand here." I figured that in this realm, because of the excess of people, this was the problem. Shopkeepers in the realm very rarely have this problem. I merely gestured an apology to the shopkeeper and moved on. I started taking notice of the surroundings, but keeping my senses on all the people. I am not of magical nature. I know some basic spells, a few low-level advanced spells, and no high-level. But I can detect a degree of magic. Here it was like the magic had been siphoned from the very dirt and essence of the world. I could only catch small whiffs of it. I tried to gather up any form of energy to no avail. Even the ghostly presence was barely felt. I saw from the corner of my eye a lost soul flickering in and out, but when I turned, it vanished. This is an effect I came to understand as a lack of believing. The less these people believe, the spirits cannot survive. Even the dead souls claimed by the Reaper himself are taken and vanish quickly, leaving no trace but the husk of a being. It would also confirm to me that it was the reason there are no creatures of nightmares here. I presume that if one were to pass through the portal to this place, it would possibly die. Die because of lack of believing. They cannot think past their veiled reality of tangibility. They rely on the technology that is held so precious. It is prevalent in the TV sets they own, cell phones, and computers that are the only things held dear and seen as real. Fantasy, as it is called, is delivered by actors and machines creating images and dialogues. Books hold the same stories of fantasy. Some hold chronicle of history, and even that is susceptible to being crossed and stewed. I thought to myself that it would only take a good vampire attack to wake them up, but the lady has since enlightened me. They are not without defenses. They would defend against such things. This world affects these creatures of the realm differently. But that got me to thinking about how it would affect me. I could breathe the air even though it was like traversing the ascended lands without a respirator. The food was edible, if not as nutritious as the realm. The lady has also explained the system of fertilizer and poisons used to help grow these foods. I wondered if I would have the same abilities in the realm. Some are not as prevalent as others. They are mired in the system of mathematics and laws of nature. While the realm has these exact same things, we also have magic and mystique to aid us. The way the people of this realm have no sense or feeling of enlightenment is almost grotesque. Enlightenment comes from boxes, makes no sense, and siphons any will or thought they may have. I have, thankfully, met a handful that break this normality, but they are dejected by society, run under with harsh words and actions that force them to hide. We share similarities between the two realms, but merely in government and a few mindsets. The ghost story that I convey to the people of the realm is that they're an entire world that lives in an ignorant bliss. Few have any ambitions beyond what is normal. They are devoid of an adventurous life. The adventure is in finding one or more thing of no importance to acquire for no reason, aimlessly wandering every day like nomads with no thought. Rewards for no great acts or deeds are handed out blindly and without merit. Magic is nothing more than a sleight of hand trick, and true magic is a lost force. Those who can tap into the little bit left flowing are branded evil. They know nothing of good magic. If you get hurt, you are drugged before a butcher that cuts you open. Bad limbs are hacked and rendered from the body. There are no healing mages or tech mages to fix or replace a limb with biomechanics. Food is a compressed gruel shaped like a circle, heated and served. While they have no fear of ghosts and creatures of the night, they are dead to the feeling of life. They cannot hear their world, cannot see the trailing glimmer of wonder in the air. The smell of adventure is in a plastic box and not the dirt outside the door. I found the few souls who can hear and see all this in their world. I have also given them that what they seek most, the enlightenment in the way. Those willing and adventurous enough, I have shown the portal. I have brought the brave and curious of like minds back to the realm. They can now also tell the ghost stories of the realm known as Earth.
Threnody Radio.
Professor Brassthorn, Ghost Stories. Tonight, the Church of the Silent Court. Professor Brassthorn, your presence is hereby summoned by the Church of the Silent Court to appear immediately, tonight. On the 5th stage of the moon, this year rotation of our heavenly gear, one steam freight ticket has been enclosed and all arrangements have been accounted for you. Your train will disembark at 10 o'clock. A plague doctor of your specialized skill is required. Bring all appropriate equipment and appear promptly. You will be in violation of your contract of any action diverting your appearance. We are always watching you. May the gear of heaven turn to your grace. Signed, the blotted crest of a dead man. I do my best to hide my disdain from the holy policeman who looms over me in my doorway, presenting me a summons. I tip my top hat and close the door, knowing he is standing out there waiting to escort me out of my makeshift apartment turned laboratory. I live in the land of steam, during a time known as the Calibration, a time of religious insurrection and scientific incredulity. The war of gods and machine waging in the corners of the minds of every modern philosophy. I've managed to find myself amongst schools of thought that just barely keep me from being persecuted for my scientific endeavors. All I want to do is find a cure, and spend a night in my life where the smell of rotting souls doesn't fill our hearts. I am a plague doctor in the time of great technology, yet a pariah who wanders the outer banks of the cities. I keep the books of the dying for the church, and research a means of loosening the spiritual hold of the wretched institution known as Heaven's Gear. I know what they want. Summons like these can only mean one thing. A priest of higher ravenous clutch has fallen to the plague, and they have sent for me to sustain him until some political holistic dredge has finally seeped. And I have been dispatched to the Church of the Silent Court, a place where they've sabotaged, tortured, and killed innocent people in their church turned castle of law. A cathedral harboring an ecstasy of fear forgotten by the obtuse and broadly timid minds of modern thought, forcing myself to disembark to the very epoch of lingering folk tales and superstition. And yet they send for a plague doctor, as if I'm to lend some sort of orthodox scientific appraisal upon a wretched holy man's soul. Unfortunately, what resides in the bottles and syringes of my work will do little to quell what infects this priest. The plague is indeed something more than a simple infection. It is a vile demigoddess who spreads madness and suicide in her smoldering, putrescent wake. Raped from a bizarre netherworld outside our petty sensorium, we can only twitch in festering morbidity under the spell of her feverish kiss. When you have seen the dead as I have, you begin to undermine your best scientific speculation and slowly begin to concede the fervent ramblings of the plague-ridden dissidents. You begin to question your sanity as the whorish creatures sniffing out their prey from fathomless darkness begin to show themselves in the corners of your splintered sight. The darkness beckons your death, a poise before the overture of endless suffering. In a time where misery isn't the exception, it's the commonality of our era. I gather my tools, bottles of glowing elixir, syringes and saws, a jar of mechanical leeches, small books on demonology and spiritual anatomy. I bind them up in my apothecary case and shut off the lamp. A shepherd's crook bearing a lantern with an electric candle casts a flickering orange light on my plague mask. the symbol of inevitable salvation or sorrow. Inside the beak resides a sophisticated respirator with holistic herbs of futility. I fasten it to my head tightly. One last look at my dwelling. I take a moment to do something that is between a prayer and a silent scream, to no god nor government in particular. It feels like spiders are scratching around inside my mask. Lowering my shroud, I open the door and the holy policeman covers his mouth with his arm, gesturing me down the long hallway. Quick, fleeting glimpses from other rooms soon turn to door latching and muffled whispers of sin. I tense my leather gloves around the crook in case. I feel like I'm falling. The crescent moon recedes behind a massive military zeppelin. As it passes the moon, it has already vanished into the industrial smog of the land. By the time I make it to the train yard, the policeman has already vanished. I had forgotten he was even there. The ticket taker refuses to handle the ticket I offer, applying gloves and cautiously looking me over as she finally accepts the ticket, only to swiftly thrust it into a nearby jar of vinegar. One last fleeting glimpse of her, I realized how tense she appeared, like an overwound watch, though not from fear of my presence. After I board, I look out the window and I see her exhale and relax into a frown. She was holding her breath. The trip over the countryside is a blur of orange, cloudy memories. I try and steady my nerves as the landscape dissipates and industry trudges away into the darkness of periphery. No longer a dabbler in medical arts, I've become something of a new title. Perhaps I'm a metaphysical detective, fringe scientist, occult curist. All my rationale falters, only to end in one word: hypocrite. I step off the train and take in the churning sprawl. Long gone are the over-industrialized districts of society. They have given way to the foregone souls of outer limitation. Peddlers set up shop on the platform, hawking tinctures and spirits, false vials of refined aether. Airship pirates who've jumped ship, muscling around as they wait for new work. Urchins, offering whatever menial talents they can for a piece of soured bread. Nightmen carrying mechanically assisted tubs of human waste to the far-off dust yards. Automata prostitutes posturing before the pimps of their perverted makers. Signs of the nearby freak shows displaying those who've survived the wretched rigors of scientific exploration. Purveyors of illegal mechanical modifications standing before the crowds, displaying their contorted, weaponized prosthetics. Holymongers offering prayer to the fallen in thinly veiled edifices of propaganda. A homeless corpse being drug off the platform, leaving a trail of pus and blood. I relent in the dismal grandeur of it all. Emblematic are those who've lost all wars and await the cold embrace of the nevermore. The countryside is swathed in soupish green fog. Carrion clings to fence lines of dilapidated farmhouses, until even those are lost into the darkness. I shut off the lantern to conserve power, and let my eyes fully adjust to the dark spectacle. My only means of navigating to the church of the silent court is the faint carriage tracks cutting through the forest, and the subtle rumble beneath my boots of the underground railway leading to the church used exclusively for transporting prisoners and exporting the dead. The burnt forest consumes me. From the tree line I see wafting spirits, and I try with all my might to convince myself that it is simply fog dancing slowly through the reaching branches. I let sorrow overtake my panic, and pretend I am amongst the company of those whom I will join in time. A black bird stands in the path, refusing to move at my approach. Steeling my resolve, I stomp up to the indignant little bird. We stand at odds, and for a moment the black holes where light would give evidence to where the eyes would reside is gone, leaving only pitch dark sockets. I gesture my crook, trying to scare it off. It stands motionless. A rush of new terror overwhelms me. I kneel, placing my case down on the soft dirt, and reach to caress my beak. It suddenly cocks its head to the side, then turns and walks, not fly, but walks into the forest wherein the darkness soon swallows its form. My leathers creak uncomfortably as I rise, dusting the dirt from the bottom of my case. I exhale a quivering breath and continue forth, picking up the pace in a hurried advance. The forest reveals a clearing, and I stand stricken before the church of the Silent Court. A climbing, shadowy edifice that dwarfs all and vanishes into the clouds. Slick, wet walls of jagged black stone, with wrought vinework clawing upwards into the whistling buttresses. I lean on my crook before the gate of twisted iron hanging open listlessly, and try to stay the nightmarish tales from my mind. Tales of the old priestess who threw her newborn baby from the tallest spire. Tales of the clergy who filled wells of blood with their own sacrament to the chortling lips of the lowest gods. Tales of the misty remains of judgment. Heaven's gear, that which turns to the barbarous servitude of cruel feudal tyrannies, shadows under the guise of everlasting light. I turn on the lantern and breathe deep the futile herbs. The large door booms and creaks, and a muted monk bows and extends a white hand with blackened fingernails into the bleak maw. I walk slowly through the vestibule and take note of the stagnant holy baths at the door's entrance of the antechamber. I want nothing more than to wash clean the filth of my countenance. Inside there lies the main desk, with a looming marble statue of the goddess behind it in an intricately carved archway. A goddess with the sun gear on her forehead, swallowing a falling star as she cradles a child who suckles the breast, holding the moon in his delicate hands. Beneath the goddess are serpents like roots, and above tree branches like human hands. The weak lighting of the gas lamps only served to dance uneasing light upon her scratched, polished form. On either side of this enormous statue leads two halls, one to the church hall, the other to the dungeon. I realize this is the last thing most prisoners see before they are thrust into either chamber, and I hope that the monk will lead me into the church hall opening. He does not. The arching path spiraling progressively downward is laden with hooks and round, stout framework used to hang wigs, coats, people. Above our heads is long, shackled railings, create to carry prisoners from one room of foul instrumental torture to the next. At a particular crossing path, there leads to a monolithic device that is both a torture prison and organ chamber, used to affix prisoners to the tubing structure and forced to sing their laments which echoes throughout the church. I clench my teeth, grateful that whatever lowly god exists in this place has spared me that particular oral assault of this evening. The monk drags his robes up to a door and produces a key that thrusts deeply into it, startling me at the sound. As I enter this place, the door is closed behind me, and my heart sinks when I hear the lock is turned. I use my lantern to survey the small room. Inside are more weary gaslights, and I remember that the carbon monoxide given off by these tend to create hallucinations. I almost feel relieved that I have something to blame in case I am affronted with some new grim encounter. On a long table is head boxes with brass plaques of certain representatives, political, religious, military. The age-old tactic of producing one of these boxes to their victim, and the promise of collecting their head to send off to yet another victim of affiliation, has been a powerful gesture of sway within this church to cultivate desired, faith-based initiatives. Nestled in the corner are large barrels of gunpowder, and I snort in surprise at how utterly reckless these people are, keeping these barrels right next to these fragile gas lights. And for an instant, I contemplate sending myself to burning absolution, instead of making my way to the other end of the room, which leads to the hallway of some muted discussion. The hallway opens up into a large octagonal chamber, something akin to a conservatory, a preaching hall, and now a makeshift surgery theater. Resting in the upper seating, I see those dressed in the trappings of all manner of occupation. Butlers, maids, cooks, coachmen, gamekeepers, gardeners, governesses, doctors, lawyers, and fellow clergymen, all whispering and fall silent when they see me approach the center table. On the slab in the middle lies a man strapped down, surrounded by higher priesthood. At once my suspicions were confirmed. This man was a fellow priest, and those in attendance are his homekeepers brought from his lofty estate to foresee their master's suffering under the invisible hands of the plague. A priest bearing the higher crests of this institution approaches me, whispering in his dead language that I need to cure him of all costs, that he has a speech that he must address to the fellow denizens tomorrow, and it is paramount that he perform his duties, as it is paramount that I perform mine. So fearful they are of losing this particular bishop from their grand chessboard. I scowl in discontent, though hidden by my mask. I approach. The other holy ones rise their robes to their faces and back away. I loom over this poor man. He is too far gone. Buboes of drooling pus dresses his robes beneath him. He is purple, and his glands are swollen with filth and scar tissue. His eyes are blood red, and he is chattering with a shivering pain. I look down at the archaic tray of knives, saws, needles, and clamps, hastily wrapped in scripture and emblazoned with holy relics. At my feet, a musty trunk of sawdust nearby, awaiting severed limbs and organs. At his side is a mirror used only to determine if breath is still present in the body. I scoff. This place is stuck out of time, and they flail in the presence of modern healthcare, foreboding the corruption of their backwards-headed purity. His back arches, and he claws at the robes on his table, and a throaty moan begins to erupt from him. The crowd gasps, and he relaxes. I turn away, and the horrible realization rings true. He is more than infected. He is possessed. The vile demigoddess has done what she does best. The plague merely a byproduct of human inability to control her song. I wave a priest over to me. He's beyond my help. If he is lucky, he will die before the sun rises. Rage flickers across the wrinkled man's visage. His dead language lashes out in a whisper. You are bound by contract to help this man. Remember what you are tasked to do. You will help cure this man, or you will, I raise my hand to cease his languishing tongue. I am not here to create miracles. I believe that's your job. The man on the slab arches once more. This time a language unlike any a human should muster bellows forth from his cracked lips. The crowd stirs, with subtle weeping from the rafters. The priest at my side bears a look of both pleading and righteous indignation. "Do something," he says. I bow my beak. Looking at my apothecary case, I managed to speak the only phrase of this dead language I had ever took the time to rehearse. Kustra ikura. Thousands of apologies. I kneel and produce a bottle of glowing fluid and induce it into my long syringe. "What is that?" the priest inquires in a low whisper. "My strongest formula. Years of research leading to what resides in this needle. I call it necroaether. What is in here is the only thing that will cure the effects of the plague, with a hefty dose of a painkiller. You have to release me from this chamber. My presence will only sully the ritual." Ritual? Yes. What you combat is something that only the strongest of faith will overcome. Begin your chant of exorcism, and when the moment of climax from your monks is sung, the vile demigoddess will reveal herself. Plunge this into the man's chest, as close to the heart as you can manage. If his faith is strong enough, he will survive the evening. But I must be released from the Church of the Silent Court. She knows I am here now, and will seek to corrupt me next. And this church will fall before night's end if you try and retain me. I am the only one who can combat this at this time. In the morning I will return and reveal all my research notes to your court. Now, release me and begin." I placed the syringe into his hand, his face soured with worry, as the onset of what must be done by him overtakes his countenance. He grabs the syringe and slowly turns back to his order of priests. With a few whispers and gestures of contempt from the other priests, they rescind and open the door leading to the exit hall. As I pass out, the monks begin to take up their chant, and the man on the slab shuffles in agony. The chamber begins to rise in a cacophony of lyrical hums and fervent chatter. The vile demigoddess begins to laugh from the man's throat. My trenchcoat brushes the narrow hall as I begin to race out, the imaginary spiders in my mask scratching around almost as loud as the pounding in my head. Up and further up, I wind my way out of the dreaded halls, back to the antechamber as the door boomed open for my exit. I look at the holy baths in the antechamber once more, as they seem to be boiling. Out in the large door I run, faster and faster through the padded black soil, my heart beating wildly, my blood pumping, churning, broken, flaming glass. I dash into the forest, heavily as my mask compresses and expands my exasperated breath, the herbs floating about inside my beak. I hear a scream unlike any I've ever beheld resonate from the Church of the Silent Court. I escape into the darkness. At the end of the forest line, deep into the countryside, my boots feeling like stone weights and my mask feeling like a prison, I look out over the soupish fog. I drop my case, fall to my knees, clutching my crook as a final resort from collapsing altogether. It is over, and my lies have secured only a brief reprieve. That man is surely dead, and I imagine a new head box with my name on it now being constructed. I feel a hefty weight in my shame, my goggles fogging from tears. I follow the wrought iron crook up the lantern, now long burned out. and I see an inky black shadow resting on top of the curve, bathed in only the looming crescent moon. It is the black bird. It casts its eyeless stare down on me, then flies away.